This is part 3 of the Travel Nursing Pay Cap series.
On the bill rate, I'm curious who decides the bill rate? Is it the staffing agency that says this is what we're charging you because of supply and demand? Is it the hospital that says this is what our budget is, here's what we can afford, and if it's too low, they just won't get travelers, so they naturally will need to raise it? Like, who's the ultimate person in control of saying, here's the bill rate? Is it the hospital or long-term care facility? Is it the staffing agency or is it the nurse? Who decides that number?
That's a great question. The answer is yes, yes, and yes.
Oh,
It's really a combination of everybody, and it really depends on, uh, for lack of a better word, what's going on in the world,
mhm.
right? There's going to be a point where, um, even now, like nurses are really driving the market, and they're really being able to set their own wages. And so the nurse is saying, and not quite this way, but the nurse is saying, look, I need to be paid this amount of money an hour or I'm not going to work. And the hospital is either the staffing firm is going to say, okay, if we can get you that, we'll get you that. And the staffing firm then takes the price of the hospital or the long term care facility. And if they can do it, they'll do it. If not, they won't. And if they
Yeah,
don't do it, then the nurse is either going to have to come down on their price a little bit or they're going to have to go somewhere else. Um, the staffing firm probably doesn't set as much as the staffing firm should be a partner for both sides. They should tell the nurse, look, this is what we're seeing in Oakland, California right now. This is what the market is paying in Billings, Montana. For your position, this is kind of what we're seeing now.
mhm,
There's a little bit of an uptick of COVID there, so those rates are probably going to go up a little bit. Um, the problem is, and again, this ties back into the rate cap issue, is that three-party negotiation that kind of goes on. If there's this artificial ceiling on what can be charged, it's going to push everything down to a point where you may either find the nurses don't want to work for it, or the staffing firms aren't going to place nurses there because they're going to lose money
yeah,
when they go through all the costs.
yeah,
And that's the reason, quite frankly, why hospitals that are, uh, I think they're all smart people, and so that's one of the reasons why they push back on nurse caps because they know that kind of constraint is going to put pressure on the system that could drive either the nurses or the staffing firms or both out of the market. So
mhm,
it's an interesting scenario. Right now there's no doubt about it that the nurses are driving uh, the rates, that they are setting their wages, that they are getting them, and that the hospitals either have to be willing to pay for it or do without. Now, as the pandemic starts to let up, we've seen in the past 30, 45 days, these rates are kind of dropping a little bit. And so, if you have a nurse now, and I'm just making this up to be ridiculous, but if you have a nurse now that comes up and says, I want to be paid $1,300 an hour, you're probably going to get pushback and be like, no, like, that's not going to happen. And
yeah,
then the nurse is going to have to come to a spot where everybody agrees. So right now,
yeah,
it's still the nurses. It's starting to tick down a little bit, but it'll probably be the nurses for the foreseeable future, quite frankly.
yeah. And talking a little bit more about the future too. So obviously these letters are going out and stuff because the long-term care facilities or maybe a couple hospitals don't know how to manage the cost. So it's their way of maybe trying to figure out a solution. But if this isn't the solution, which, you and and I think anyone in healthcare really does not like this solution, how are the hospitals going to keep managing these really high bill rates or long-term care facilities? Like, what's the long-term impact to the facilities on having such high bill rates to pay?
Well, I think the high bill rates will come down
Mm,
substantially as we move out of this pandemic. I think the only way that you're going to really affect this kind of issue going forward is by increasing the supply of nurses,
mm,
because that will bring the equilibrium closer toward the middle. Um, you could you could do it by the argument that's being made by the facilities is, well, nurse caps would do that. we've talked about the fact that, well, it would certainly allow them to line up their costs because they could say, I'm not going to be paying more than $90 an hour for a nurse in 2023. And so now I can build my budget and know what that's like.
Mhm.
Um, you probably are going to have a lot of room in that budget because you're not going to have a lot of nurses working for you.
Mhm.
So if you increase the supply of nurses, that would kind of level things out a little bit more. I think some of the facilities in the country that have benefited from various grants from the federal government under the CARES Act and some of the COVID relief funding, maybe that's led them to be a little bit more aggressive in their pricing behavior. So as that money starts to fade
Mhm.
out and is not replaced, it's like anything else in life, really. Um, People are going to become better consumers, and the hospitals and the long-term care facilities are going to, try to shop around more. As things subside, the prices will come down more, which will mean the bill rates will come down more. And so, as that kind of levels out, I think people will start to recover and get back toward more normal footing when it comes to what's being charged,
Mhm.
and what they're being faced with. Now, long-term care facilities and nursing homes, I do think are going to need some help from somebody,
Yeah.
whether it's readjusted Medicaid reimbursement rates or something, because their sources of revenue are just really, really decreased. But again, you can't you can't put a limit on what your employees are going to earn, because it's just going to drive them away. One of the things that we've heard about from a lot of facilities is, and I think you touched on this in the beginning, you get somebody that's working at a facility that's working next to a travel nurse, and they start talking about something, and they find out all of a sudden that the nurse they're working next to is making literally two times what they're making.
Mhm.
And so then their response is, "Oh my God, like, maybe I'm mad, but what can I do to make that kind of money?" And then all of a
Mhm.
sudden now they go to become a travel nurse, and now the hospital loses another employee, or the long-term care facility. So, easy for me to say in my world, but obviously the hospitals and long-term care facilities have to start paying nurses more and better wages to begin with,
Mhm.
because that's one of the things that's driving them. But I do think, overall, God willing, this really starts to decrease and turns the page into something more manageable of a situation. And as that happens, it's like all of our systems have been thrown out of whack, kind of get back toward a regular equilibrium. And we see a pricing structure in the travel nurse and nurse healthcare industry where the nurses are making the wages that they deserve, that they're making a good living, that they're safe, that they're working in safe conditions, and their lives are not in danger every day, and that the facilities have access to the talent they need so they can take care of their patients the best way possible. I mean,
Yeah.
that's, I think, really what we all hope for moving forward as soon as possible.
100%. Yeah, that sounds great to me. And with this, with these, I guess 6 states, it sounds like about 6 that are actually looking into the wage caps. What do you think is the likely outcome? How nervous or worried should healthcare workers be that this is going to actually happen?
Well, I mean, look, we're trying our best to make sure it doesn't happen. But the interesting thing is that we found, um, that the best advocates against a nurse rate cap system are nurses. And we've had a couple state hearings, and there was a hearing in Kansas at the beginning of the month where there was a bill that would impose rate caps. And it's, as wonderful and as great as an advocate as I think I am, there's nothing like a nurse getting up there and telling his or her story,
Mhm.
and pushing back against these legislators, and letting them know what they would be doing to them, and what they would be doing to their family, and what they would be doing to the state's healthcare system if they pass that bill. So I would say to all nurses out there, per diem nurses, travel nurses, nurses that work full time at hospitals and have never even thought of working for a temporary staffing company, It doesn't matter because it's going to affect everybody. You need to get out there and you need to tell your legislators that you will not stand for a nurse rate cap because
And
it's just it's not something that anybody should have to deal with. Certainly not nurses, and they'll just go somewhere else. And they'll, if you're in Kansas, you'll go up to Iowa or somewhere else and work. And if you're in Florida, you go to Georgia or wherever. There's lots of states for people to work in, uh, and that's where they'll go. So
yeah,
nurses are really going to be uh, the best advocates for defeating these kind of proposals
okay.
because they're such a powerful group.
And that's them looking up on their, state websites to see who to call, and the best way for them to do it is actually pick up the phone and call or write emails. Is that the best suggestion?
Yeah, I mean, it's
Mhm.
funny because some of the state cap, Oregon, for instance, which has a rate cap proposal that's being debated now, they're still doing everything virtually. So emailing their legislators in Oregon, and calling them directly is going to be the best.
Okay.
The same thing in Missouri. Missouri's considering legislation that has rate caps. Pennsylvania and Ohio, all of these states are putting forth these proposals that would cap what a nurse can make, and reaching
Mm,
out to your legislator and letting them know that this isn't going to stand is the best way to make sure or to help ensure that they don't get enacted into law.
yeah. Well, that's awesome. Well, thank you so much. And is there a if the travel professionals or nurses or anyone wants to follow along on how this thing is progressing, are you guys at ASA putting out publications? Is there somewhere you recommend they look, or is it just unsure of how to follow along as this unfolds?
I'm trying to think because obviously every state legislature has their own website, but they can be you kind of have to know what you're looking for.
Mm,
Um, I think we write some things, and AmericanStaffing.net is our website.
mhm.
Hopefully, there's stuff out in the um, public forum that people can look at. I would say Google. The one thing that's very interesting about this issue, and I think it's because it's such an emotional issue, is it's generated a ton of media.
Mhm.
And it was interesting because in the beginning, all the media was price gouging, price gouging, price gouging. Nurse rate caps, nurse rate cap. In the past couple weeks, we've seen the story start to shift more toward the nurse's point of view. And I think a lot of that is because nurses have become more active in some of these states. And it's led the editors to be like, oh, we should probably talk to them and get their side of the story. And
Mm,
so, now we have a whole slew of stories from the nurse's perspective, which is hugely important. And so it's generated a lot of media buzz. So, I think you'll see stories on the news, you'll read stuff. And then, if you go on the ASA website, um, my contact information is there. And if you call or shoot me an email and you have specific questions, I am more than happy to talk to you and
mm.
share any information that I have with you, because we're really close to it. So any of your podcast listeners should feel free to reach out to me, and I'd be more than happy to try to answer their questions and be a resource for them and help in any way I can.
That is so generous. Well, thank you. Do you have any last thing you feel like we didn't cover that you'd like to share?
No, I think it was a
Yeah,
great
me
conversation. I
too.
mean, it's such an important topic, and again, I just, I want to thank all the nurses. Really, it goes without saying, but it has to be said nonetheless that have been doing the most important work during these past 2 years. I mean, they've been doing the most important work forever, but now the pandemic has just put such a spotlight on all the sacrifices they've
Mm,
made, and all the things that they've had to go through and their families have had to go through. I've been very fortunate. My family has been. Our 16-year-old daughter just got COVID a couple weeks ago, and it was a very mild case, thankfully. And but I know that there are so many families that have been affected by this that have really seen, their families helped so much by these healthcare professionals that put their life on the line. So, we just thank them all so much. And again, if there's anything that I can do, if you've got questions about how the bills are going or what you should be doing to help, uh, just shoot me an email or give me a call. And I'm more than happy to help in any way I can.
Well, thank you. Thank you so, so much for sharing your information, your time, Toby. And yeah, thanks to the nurses, and definitely stay in touch with Toby if you guys are curious. And then at TravCon, we will keep posting on our own social medias as we learn stuff and new things unfold. But thank you, Toby, so
Thank you,
much for
Laura.
your
Appreciate
time.
it. Appreciate you
All
having me
right.
on. Take care.
Absolutely. All right.
Bye
Bye.
bye.
Thanks for listening to Travel Nursing and Allied Life. You can find the full show notes below or at travcon.org. Please help us out by rating our podcast on iTunes or wherever you get your podcasts.